Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Klaus can get away with murder.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Stories and content in Weird Darkness can be disturbing for some listeners and is intended for mature audiences only. Parental discretion is strongly advised.
Welcome, Weirdos. I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Here you'll find stories of the paranormal, supernatural, legends, lore, crime, conspiracy, mysterious, macabre, unsolved, and unexplained. If you're new here, welcome to the show, and if you're already a member of this weirdo family, please take a moment and invite someone else to listen. Recommending Weird Darkness to others helps make it possible for me to keep doing the show. And while you're listening, be sure to check out WeirdDarkness.com, where you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Minds, MeWe, and more, along with the Weird Darkness Weirdos Facebook group. Coming up in this episode, the creature had dark or black skin covered in masses of skin or fins that looked like algae growing all over its body. It seemed to have gills or matted hair that looked like gills on its face and head. 2 yellow eyes leered out from under a prominent forehead. That's the description one witness had for the thing in City Park, New Orleans. Anyone who knew the little family before that July day would say that one thing was certain. Vernon Plager loved his wife and daughter more than anything. But then Paul Reed moved to the neighborhood, and it led to more than just a broken marriage. It led to murder. The moose is said to be a ghostly white and a giant of stature and weight, with antlers bigger than any other moose ever seen. Considered a harbinger of doom, it was first reported in 1891, but has been seen as recently as 2002. Could this giant ghostly moose at Lobster Lake, North Dakota actually have existed or still exist? For the citizens of Brabant Province, Belgium, the era of the Brabant killers left behind traumatic wounds that have never really healed. Making matters worse is the fact that the killers were never brought to justice. These stories and more coming your way. Now, bolt your doors, lock your windows, turn off your lights, and come with me into the Weird Darkness. In the early morning hours of Sunday, February 7, 2010, a tractor driver who had worked the Caesar Parade route in Metairie was heading home to his apartment in the Lake Terrace section of New Orleans when he decided to take a detour through City Park. While driving down Harrison Avenue, approximately halfway between the renovated New Orleans Police Department mounted unit horse stables and Scout Island in the vicinity of the infamous Mona Lisa Drive, the man was startled to see a dark form lurch out of the shadows and approach the road. The witness slowed his vehicle for a better look. The dark form ran along the tree line for several minutes, moving in and out of the mist and shadows under the oaks. The driver now came to a complete stop and observed what he described as a troll or a gill man dart across the Harrison Avenue turnaround, making its way towards Scout Island and the overgrowth of the abandoned City Park East Golf Course. According to the witness, the creature had dark or black skin, covered in masses of skin or fins that looked like algae growing all over its body. It seemed to have gills or matted hair that looked like gills on its face and head. 2 yellow eyes leered out from under a prominent forehead. Apparently aware of the man's presence, once it had crossed the road, it stopped and looked back at the man, who said then opened its mouth in a growl, revealing a set of massive fangs and a lolling tongue that looked, according to the man, too big for its mouth. It lifted up a clawed hand as if to wave the man off, The driver clearly observed long claws at the fingertips in the ambient light, and then it turned, lurching off into the shadows of Scout Island. The witness did not report his strange experience to the police because he assumed they would not believe him, and since the Gill man, troll, or whatever it was had not hurt him, he didn't feel it was necessary to bring unwelcome scrutiny upon himself. When he joined a group of fellow tractor drivers for parade routes early the next morning, he did tell a friend what had happened. His friend put him in touch with Haunted America Tours. There are numerous legends regarding ghosts and creatures lurking in the placid environment of the New Orleans City Park. The urban legend surrounding the park's Mona Lisa Drive is just one example. According to some reports, there is an older legend, popular among the Alapusa Indians who lived along nearby Bayou St. John in the colonial days of New Orleans, concerning a foul, ghoul-like creature inhabiting the woody tracts and marshy areas along the bayou shore. Descriptions of the creature by the Alapusa and accounts from slaves who worked on the Allard Plantation, which comprised all the acres that later became City Park, match the account provided by the tractor driver in 2010. A mid-city resident who lives in the City Park Avenue area claims to be a descendant of the Alapusa tribe, and he confirmed that recently there have been numerous strange occurrences in City Park. The resident, who asked not to be identified, suggested that the recent sightings might be connected to the numerous film projects that have used City Park and its surrounding areas as locations and backdrops for shooting. Some of these projects, he said, have supernatural or paranormal storylines, and it's his opinion that this activity has stirred up the spirits of the land, from the ghosts of Allard Plantation slaves and long-dead Indians to more modern phantoms. City Park, he said, has many, many guardians. There is an interesting footnote to this story. On a recent visit to the Props Fountain area in City Park, it was noticed that some of the heavy iron bars in the security fence now surrounding the fountain had been bent and broken as if by tremendous force. The interesting thing, other than the fact that the black wrought iron would be impossible to break without the aid of machinery or welding equipment, is that the breaks appeared to have occurred from the inside out. Anyone who knew the family before that July day would say that one thing was certain. Vernon Plager loved his wife and daughter more than anything. But then Paul Reed moved to the neighborhood, and it led to more than just a broken marriage. It led to murder. That story is up next on Weird Darkness.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now. Devil in Disguise. Only on Peacock.
Do you listen to Weird Darkness while working on the job or at your place of employment? Do you have other weirdos listening in along with you at the office? If so, you'll want to enter our monthly Weird at Work drawing. On the second Wednesday of every month, I choose a random entry from all that came in over the previous month. I'll give you and your employer a shout-out in the podcast. Plus, I'll send your place of business a Weird at Work prize pack, which includes 2 bags of Weird Dark Roast coffee, 6 Weird at Work coffee mugs to drink that coffee with, 1 case of real paper towels in case you spill that coffee, and 1 case of real paper toilet tissue because everyone poops. I'll also toss in a few Weird Darkness magnets and stickers for good measure. And for you, the person who entered your place of business, you get a Proud to be a Weirdo t-shirt. It's a prize pack worth almost $200, but it's yours free if you are the randomly drawn winner for the month. Register now to win by clicking on Weird at Work at WeirdDarkness.com. And remember, entries are only good for 1 month, so after each drawing, you'll need to re-enter for the next month's drawing. Enter your place of business now by clicking on Weird at Work at WeirdDarkness.com. Vernon Plager's marriage was good. They had a rough patch the year before, but now he and his wife Ivy were getting along really well. Vernon, who was 28, blamed most of their problems on the fact that Ivy, 22 in 1928, was so young when they fell in love. She was only 16 when they married, and then their baby, Lois, came. Ivy had gotten restless, and she struggled with all the responsibility of being a young mother and wife. Paul Reed, 22, entered the picture in 1927, and that is when everything turned bad in Vernon and Ivy's marriage. Paul lived across the street from Ivy and Vernon and saw her in the neighborhood and found her attractive. Ivy was small and fair-skinned, and she had vivid blue eyes. They met on July 4th when Paul and Ivy were outside on the sidewalk shooting off firecrackers. Reed got Ivy's phone number and called her repeatedly through July and August. Paul was finally able to convince Ivy to go riding with him while her husband was at work. Ivy went for a drive with Reed and became smitten with the young man. Paul had never had a girl before, and Ivy was bored with her life, and Paul made her laugh. The rides led to more, and then they spent a night in a local hotel, the Chick House, before they left on a train for Peoria and then for Davenport for 2 weeks in October of 1927. The papers would later call it an elopement. Vernon's brother Floyd had married Ivy's sister, and one awful night when Ivy returned to Rockford, Illinois, Floyd came to Vernon's house and asked Vernon to come with him. Floyd and Vernon went to the police and asked them to come to Floyd's house. Ivy was there with Reed in what would be considered a compromising position. Later, when asked what the couple was wearing, the police officer replied, "sheets." Ivy and Reed were arrested and taken to jail. Vernon let her spend the night in jail but went to talk to Ivy the next morning. He offered to let her come home. He said he would forgive her everything as long as she came home to him and their little daughter. Ivy did return home, and the couple worked on their marriage. Vernon even agreed to give up smoking the pipe that he knew she hated. They were working together to repair their marriage and built a good life together. He bought her new furniture and surprised her with little bouquets of roses, her favorite flower. Vernon also bought her a very pretty ring for her birthday. Ivy told people that Vernon was good to her. He made sure they had a comfortable home and that she and Lois were very happy. They moved into a new upper apartment on Howard Avenue in the beginning of July. Paul Reed did not just go away, though. They would see him pass by the new house, and sometimes when they were out with their daughter, they would notice Paul there, in the background, watching them. On Wednesday, July 18, 1928, the family went for a drive to Byron, Illinois. There was an outdoor concert that Vernon knew Ivy would love. He came home from work, and they drove there and listened to the music before heading back home. Vernon thought that he saw Paul Reed going south on Route 2 when they were headed north. It worried him because he knew that Paul Reed had stopped by the house that morning to see Ivy. Reed still loved Ivy and wanted to know if she would run away with him again. Vernon trusted Ivy when she said she told Reed that she was staying with her husband and her little girl. They followed their usual bedtime ritual that night, and he knelt down by Lois's bedside to say his prayers alongside with hers. Later, Ivy stated that they heard noises out in the alley, but they didn't think too much about it. Vernon didn't even go check on it. The next morning was a work day for Vernon, and he kissed Lois and Ivy goodbye and walked around to the back where he parked his car, an old two-door car that was owned by the Crosley Radio Company where he worked for his brother, C.A. Plager. The quiet summer morning was ripped apart by a loud explosion right before 9 a.m. Ivy looked out and saw Vernon's car all blown apart. Witnesses would later say that they saw Vernon crank his car and it wouldn't start. He went back into the house for a moment and came back outside. He crawled into the car and stepped on the starter button. Vernon's body was lifted 20 feet in the air from the blast, higher than the wires, according to one man, and then he fell back into the wreckage of his car. His hip area was obviously crushed, and his left leg was twisted around his neck. His intestines were on the pavement next to him. He was unconscious but regained consciousness quickly. Vernon was lying in the street and Ivy rushed to his side and grabbed his hand. Suddenly she stood up and said, "Oh, I can't even look at you," and ran back into the house, grabbing their little daughter on the way in. Lois, the daughter, wanted to go see her daddy and was hysterically screaming for Ivy to let her go. 2 policemen showed up and lifted Vernon's horribly mangled body into the police ambulance and transported him to the hospital. He was in a great amount of pain, and Vernon begged the policeman to shoot him. He also told the police that they should find Paul Reed to question him about the explosion. They rushed Vernon to the hospital, but there was nothing the doctors could do for him. They just attempted to alleviate his pain. Vernon died shortly after arrival to the operating room. Vernon's funeral was held at the Fred Olson Undertaking Parlor. There were at least 500 morbid people wandering around outside, attempting to see the pretty girl widow, as Ivy was called in the paper. Ivy was accompanied to the funeral home by police matron Ida Patterson, since she was in police custody at the time. She cried during the ceremony, especially when the pastor said death was on the track of Mr. Plager. Ivy stepped up to the coffin to look at her husband's face one last time. Everyone mentioned how handsome he looked, even in death. The coffin hid the damage caused by the blast. A relative held little Lois up so she too could see her father. The family watched as the lid closed on Vernon for the last time. When Ivy left the building, photographers actually jumped on taxis and other cars to get a good angle for a picture. Vernon's body was sent to Pearl City for burial, where most of his family lived. Ivy was allowed to go with her mother and the policewoman to Pearl City. There were over 500 attendees to Vernon's funeral. Paul Reed had been very busy all week prior to the bombing. He went to a store in Rockford to inquire about purchasing dynamite to blow up a spring on his camping spot in Wisconsin, but they refused to sell it to him. Reed picked up his 22-year-old nephew, Kenneth Reed, and they drove down to Dixon, where Kenneth's father, Arthur, lived. Arthur was Paul's 45-year-old brother. Paul told Arthur that he needed to buy some dynamite for the spring. Arthur had to ride over to the neighboring farm of Shelby Riddle to give a bid for a job that Riddle needed done on the farm, and Arthur was meeting him. While he was there, Arthur asked Riddle about where to purchase dynamite and mentioned to Riddle that his nephew Paul needed to blow up a spring. Riddle told him that the only person that had any dynamite would be Ben Good, the highway commissioner. He kept the dynamite in a shed at a quarry near Polo. The men all headed back to Arthur's place for a late supper. After supper, Paul asked Arthur for a crowbar, and he and Kenneth left in Reed's car. They drove over to the quarry, according to Kenneth's statement later. They parked up on the road and walked down to the shed. There was a lock on the door, so Paul used a ledge to gain access to the roof and lifted some roof planks off with the crowbar. He dropped down inside the shed, leaving Kenneth outside as a lookout. Paul was inside about 10 minutes. He crawled back out onto the roof and then used the crowbar to hammer the planks back in place. It was dark and he didn't notice that he actually left an open spot. This would be evidence used against him later. When Paul dropped back down to the ground, Kenneth could see a coil of wire and 3 sticks of dynamite in Paul's pants. Police arrested Paul Reed within hours of the murder when he surrendered to the Ogle County Police. They arrested Ivy Plager as well on the suspicion that she was an accessory to the murder of her husband, but she was released after several days. She went to stay with her sister, Mrs. Plager, and her husband's brother Floyd, Vernon's brother, on Greenwood Avenue while awaiting Reed's trial. After the bombing on the morning of July 19, 1928, Paul Reed's car was found in Mount Morris, Illinois by detectives Strout and Williams. They found a small coil of wire when they searched the car. They recognized it as being the same kind as the wire that was found twisted on the starter wire of Vernon's car. Paul was arraigned and hired a local firm of Dixon, Bracken, Devine, and Dixon. They sent attorney Charles H. Linscott to represent Reed. At the coroner's inquest in the undertaking rooms, Fred Olson asked Ivy Plager if she cared for Paul Reed. She said that she had loved Paul Reed once, but not any longer. Paul Reed was described as a gaunt, hollow-eyed young man. He was also questioned at the inquest, but on the advice of his attorney, he refused to testify. Ivy's father came to visit her in jail. He was a stern, hard old man who didn't offer any comfort to Ivy. "What are you going to do when this is all over?" her father asked, without so much as a greeting. Ivy wasn't sure and stated that she was thinking of coming home. This statement was met by silence from her father. When police matron Ida Patterson mentioned to Ivy's father that Ivy needed a little money to help her buy a new pair of shoes, he stood up and walked away without saying another word. Police searched the rooming house where Paul Reed was staying, but it was two newsmen that made the most dramatic discovery. They found sticks of dynamite and nitroglycerin fuses wrapped in old newspaper in a hole under the basement stairs. Chicago Tribune reporter Robert W. Wood and Chicago Journal reporter Michael Fielding found the incriminating evidence on July 23rd. They approached the landlady of the rooming house, Mrs. Lena Hawkins, and explained they were special investigators, and she gave them access to the house and Reed's rooms. They started in the attic and made their way down to the basement where there was storage for items belonging to the roomers. Police had already searched the house, including the basement, twice, but missed the hole discovered under the stairway near the last step. Wood and Fielding called the state's attorney, William Knight, and he came to the house. They extracted the packages holding the dynamite and fuses from under the stairway with Knight as a witness. The men took the packages to the living room, and Mrs. Hawkinson joined them. They were unsettled to see that a small glycerin fuse contained in a bright copper shell was waxed onto the shell, setting it in place. The three men felt that this must have been prepared in the basement since it made the dynamite very dangerous to move afterward. Oddly, landlady Hawkinson was much more concerned about whether she would have to testify in court than the fact that there were dangerous explosives located in her house. Paul Reed was charged with first-degree murder with the option of the death penalty. Reed's trial was the first trial held in Winnebago County where the sentence could be execution by the electric chair. Winnebago County, Illinois had previously held 4 cases that resulted in the death penalty, but the guilty men were all hanged. His trial started on December 3, 1928. His defense counsel was C.H. Linscott, who was assisted by Jerome Dixon. The prosecutor was William D. Knight. The judge presiding over the case was Circuit Judge Arthur A. Fisher. The defense won a major point when it was ruled that Vernon's dying words that Paul Reed had set the dynamite could not be admitted as evidence. At the trial, every seat was taken. The courtroom normally seated around 350 people, but each day of the Reed trial, the spectators smashed together until the crowd reached around 500 people. Some of the more forward-thinking women brought sack lunches and ate right in their seats so they didn't lose the seats when court resumed after lunch. Both Arthur Reed, the defendant's brother, and Kenneth Reed, the defendant's nephew, testified for the state. Arthur explained that Paul told him he was going on his annual camping trip and needed the dynamite for a spring that ran through his campsite. Kenneth told of the stealing of the dynamite from the shed. Another witness who caused quite a stir on the stand was Edward Rydberg. Rydberg carried a little tin box that he bumped against several items of furniture on his way to the stand. Then he announced that he worked on the road construction crew and was the expert on handling explosives. He opened the little black box and nonchalantly removed 2 sticks of dynamite from the box and plunked them down on the judge's desk. This action caused some nervous laughter from the courtroom and, understandably, the judge. Rydberg seemed to enjoy his effect on the crowd, and a grin crossed his face as he testified. The defense counsel's questions of Rydberg and also of motorcycle policeman Stuart Mulford led spectators and news reporters to suspect that they were attempting to prove that the explosion was caused by a faulty gas tank rather than dynamite. Everyone wanted to see the star of the case, Mrs. Iva, or Ivy as she was best known, Plager. They wanted to see the young lady for whom one man was willing to kill another. She was described in the papers as mysterious and elusive. The testimony of police detective Tony Shikotzes was by far the most dramatic point in the trial up to that point. He told the story of finding Ivy and Paul Reed together in the Floyd Plager home on Greenwood Avenue. Floyd was Vernon's brother and his wife was Ivy's flesh-and-blood sister. The couple were found together on the morning of November 5, 1927, when they returned from Iowa. The room was silent as Shikotzes gave his testimony. The several hundred people in the room seemed to lean forward to hear the story. These were the first details of the intimate relationship between Ivy and the man on trial for the murder of her husband. The crowd exploded with comments after the testimony, and the judge actually banged the gavel and threatened to clear the room to get them to quiet back down. Ivy finally testified on December 6th to a packed courtroom. Ivy answered as State's Attorney William Knight hurled question after question at her. She hesitated on describing her husband's death scene, and a sob escaped her. Though she tried to avoid answering, Ivy was given no choice. She sobbed as she described the way she found her husband. He was lying in the alley. His legs were off, as near as I can remember. His body was out, his stomach was out, and lying beside him. Oh dear, it was terrible. Ivy endured a grueling 110 minutes of badgering by the state's attorney and the defense attorney. She told of meeting Paul Reed on July 4, 1927. The defense counsel, Linscott, tried to show that it was Ivy that pursued Reed for the illicit meetings. Ivy also told of the day before the bombing. Paul Reed stopped at her house. She testified that he was angry, so angry in fact that he was shaking. He kissed her and asked her if he had any chance at all with her. Ivy told him that he shouldn't come back ever again. Reed told her, "You're going to wait too long. Something bad is going to happen." Paul Reed testified in his defense on December 6th. His testimony started with his personal history. He was born in Rockford but moved to Palisades, Colorado. While there, he worked in a coal mine, on a cattle ranch, and in an oil field. It was while he worked in the oil field that he learned to work with dynamite. He came back to Rockford and got a job at the National Lock Company, and most recently he worked as a draftsman at the Ingersoll Milling Machine Company. After the jury deliberated, Paul Reed was convicted of the murder of Vernon Plager and sentenced to life in prison in Joliet. He left Rockford as a 23-year-old young man, but when he arrived in Joliet, he became prisoner number 2503. He was transferred to Pontiac Reformatory in 1940 with tuberculosis. He died there of the disease in 1947. He denied the killing of Vernon Plager until the day he died. Vernon's family was very hurt by some of the things reported in the paper. Some articles reported that Vernon had stepped out with other girls, that Vernon's family were keeping Ivy's daughter Lois from her, and that Vernon had left the family penniless. These reports supposedly came from the defense counsel because they were trying to discredit Vernon, as if there would be any justification for blowing a man apart in front of his family. C.A. Plager spoke for the Plager family. They had taken Lois, the 5-year-old daughter to Vernon and Ivy, to Pearl City to stay with Vernon's mother, only while Ivy was incarcerated. C.A. also explained that his brother never would go out with another woman. Vernon worked as a brakeman at Central Amusement Park, and it was his job to ride with the young ladies or young men that were by themselves. It was his job to accompany single riders. C.A. spoke of his brother as a hard worker that was willing to forgive his wife in order to keep his little family together. Vernon had once told his brother that he loved Ivy so much he couldn't live without her. Unfortunately, this is one of those stories where no one has a happy ending. Vernon was dead. Paul Reed never left prison, his life basically over at 22. Little Lois had to grow up without her loving father.
At General Motors, we make more than electric vehicles. We're helping to make the world a safer, more inclusive place for all. As the first automaker to support the Equality Act, General Motors celebrates and embraces diversity every day, especially during Pride Month. Which is why we're proud to team up with iHeartRadio to support Can't Cancel Pride and the LGBTQ+ community. Because everybody in means everybody. Learn more at gm.com.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on,
Did you want her dead?
you can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Ivy moved to Chicago for a while and then apparently came back to Rockford. In 1930, she was working as a live-in maid for a family on Harlem Boulevard. There was no mention of Lois. It was all so tragic and completely pointless. Newspapers stated that the couple's relationship was a progressively explosive one beginning with fireworks and climaxing in dynamite. When Weird Darkness returns, for the citizens of Brabant Province, Belgium, the era of the Brabant Killers left behind traumatic wounds that have never really healed. Making matters worse is the fact that the killers were never brought to justice. But first, the moose is said to be a ghostly white and a giant of stature and weight, antlers bigger than any moose ever seen. Considered a harbinger of doom, it was first reported in 1891, but has been seen as recently as 2002. Could this giant, ghostly moose at Lobster Lake, North Dakota actually have existed, or possibly still exist? That story is up next. You've bolted the doors, locked the windows, turned off the lights, and now all you need before listening to Weird Darkness is a mug of Weird Dark Roast coffee to keep those ghostly chills at bay. Weird Dark Roast coffee has deep notes of cocoa, caramel, and a touch of sinister sweetness. This is an exclusive coffee that I selected specifically for you, my weirdo family. Weird Dark Roast is not available in stores, coffee houses, mad scientist labs, or even the dark web, but you can find it at WeirdDarkness.com. Use the promo code WEIRD, and you won't even have to pay for delivery on your first order. Weird Dark Roast Coffee. Find the link and grab a bag now for yourself at WeirdDarkness.com. In 1891, an extremely large white moose was first seen in Maine by Clarence Duffy of Old Town, a hunting guide who was working around Lobster Lake. Though he did not get near enough to the animal to take a shot, he could see him plainly. Horrified by the encounter, when Duffy told his story, he was laughed at. However, a few months later, a Bangor lumberman named John Ross, who was also at Lobster Lake, also saw the big moose. With this second sighting, some people began to believe. That same year, a New York hunter saw the big moose near Sourdough Lake and fired several slugs into the animal without the least apparent effect, except for making it angry. The moose then charged the man, who took refuge in a bear cave where he remained for about an hour before the large animal sauntered away. However, these tales were still mostly discounted until a New York City sportsman, Howard Van Ness, saw the big moose and shot him several times in 1892. The event occurred about 30 miles northeast of Norcross when Van Ness and 3 other New York men were hunting. Van Ness was separated from his companions when he shot the moose, which he described as weighed a ton and as tall as a camel with magnificent head and antler. After his shot hit the animal just above the shoulder, the moose let out a deep bellow and a grunt before coming after Van Ness, who took shelter beneath a tangled mass of fallen trees and branches. The moose then circled the area at tremendous speed and once jumped over his hiding place before finally giving up. Afterward, many hunters began to look for the great white moose, but it wasn't seen again until 1895. At that time, a Bangor taxidermist named Granville Gray spied the moose at a distance. A few years later, in 1899, Gilman Brown of West Newbury, Massachusetts got close enough to the moose on the Roach River to count 22 points on one side of his antlers. Usually moose antlers rarely have more than 8 to 12 points on a side. Brown also fired 5 shots at the large animal, which simply glared at him and stalked majestically away. The specter moose, called such because of its white or light gray coloring, is said to stand 10 to 15 feet tall, weighs nearly 2,500 pounds, and has an immense set of formidable antlers that stretch from 10 to 12 feet across. In comparison, an average male moose in Maine at the time weighed about 8 to 900 pounds, stood around 6 feet tall, and had an antler span of around 4 to 6 feet. The story gained national attention when it was described in a New York Times article in November 1899. More sightings followed in the coming years, with one reported in 1901 when a hunter from Boston, Massachusetts spotted the beast near Chairback Mountain in the Katahdin region. In 1906, George Nealand of Sherman, Maine came close to the moose when he was bicycling on the road between Sherman and Macquayock. At first he thought it was a horse, but then he stopped to take a closer look. He was surprised to determine that rather it was a very large white moose. Suddenly, the immense beast charged at him, and Neeland was forced to climb a tree to safety. After investigating the bicycle, the moose vanished into the forest. In addition to its massive size, many reports also described the moose as glowing faintly, having the ability to simply disappear and walking through solid objects. Hunters often said they were never able to get near enough to get a shot, and on the few occasions that they did, the animal was unhurt. In the following years, the moose would appear in waves of sightings, one of which occurred in 1917, only to disappear for years before it would be seen again. Though albino mooses are extremely rare, they do exist, and skeptics often attribute these sightings to albinism. In fact, there is an area of Ontario, Canada that is called the White Moose Forest due to the uncommon number of sightings of white moose, which the locals call spirit moose. However, albino moose have eyes that are of pink hue, and the spectre moose has brown eyes. Further, the size of these moose is an anomaly in and of itself. Moose can also suffer from a condition caused by an infestation of winter ticks that causes the lightening of an animal's coat. However, this condition also causes the moose to rub off most of its hair, and their bodies are described as skinny and emaciated, which does not fit the description of this giant beast. Regardless of the skeptics, the locals take this beast quite seriously. Another rash of sightings occurred in 1932, and then again in 1938. In the latter year, most of the spectre moose were seen in the forests of Chesuncook region, along the west branch of the Penobscot River. One vivid report came from a hunter by the name of Houston who got a very good look at the beast when he came along a herd of about 16 moose with 3 males watching over the grazing females grazing in a group with 3 males watching over them. 2 of the males were large, healthy moose, but the third was of great size, making the others look like pygmies and was of a white, luminous coloration. When Houston turned his back for a moment and then turned back around, the large white moose was gone, seemingly having vanished without a trace. Other stories are even more bizarre. One tells of a group of hunters near the Molluncus Stream in east-central Maine that killed a large white moose. Afterward, they slit its throat and hung it from a tree overnight so they could skin and dress it the next day. However, when they awoke the next morning, the white moose was gone. That night, the dead and vanished moose simply walked into their camp with its throat still cut. The hunters shot at it again, but the moose was unfazed and walked away. It was later seen near Ashland, some 90 miles to the north, at which time it was shot again, with no effect. Some tales say that the moose makes an appearance when something bad is about to happen. This allegedly occurred in Franklin shortly before the town's restaurant burned down in 2002. Questions about this large creature remain today as to whether it is simply a very large breed of moose with a rare and anomalous color pattern, or if it is a mystical, ghostly animal that has roamed this region for over a century. In either case, the creature remains a local legend that has accumulated volumes of local lore over the years. Belgium is a tiny country nestled between the Netherlands, Germany, and France. As a result, Belgium is home to one large community of Dutch speakers known as the Flemish, an equally large community of French speakers called the Walloons, and a small community of German speakers. Despite its size, Belgium was once a colonial power that ruled the most resource-rich country in all of sub-Saharan Africa. Since the 1960s, when Belgium lost control of the Congo, it's gone back to just being another small Western European country. However, Belgium's bliss was brutally interrupted in the early 1980s when at least 28 people were viciously murdered by a pack of criminals later known as the Brabant Killers. Besides the 28 killed, the crazy Brabant Killers also injured 40 and committed a string of very violent robberies. For the citizens of Brabant Province, Belgium, the era of the Brabant Killers left behind traumatic wounds that have never really healed. Making matters worse is the fact that the killers were never brought to justice. Beginning in 1982, a series of armed robberies saw at least 3 men terrorize the cities and small towns of Brabant province. The first heist occurred on March 13, 1982, when 2 men armed with a single 12-gauge shotgun attempted to rob a store in Dinant. Months later, an Austin Allegro and a Volkswagen Santana were stolen by armed men. Eyewitnesses, the police, and the media began to call the thieves the Gang of Brabant. Between March and August 1982, they specialized in small-time robberies that targeted grocery stores and restaurants. The violence escalated on August 14, 1982. While robbing a French grocery store, members of the gang engaged in a shootout with the police, resulting in 2 wounded officers. On September 30th, 3 armed members of the gang pulled off a brazen daylight heist in Brussels. Their target was a gun store. Once inside, the armed robbers forced all customers and workers to the floor and then began to ransack the store for semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns. When police officers responded, 1 was shot and killed, while 2 others were seriously wounded. The true horror of the Brabant killers was exposed on December 23, 1982. On that date, police found the corpse of caretaker José Van den Einde inside the Beersel Inn. Van den Einde, a retired taxi driver, was likely targeted as part of the robbery of the Beersel Inn. However, Van den Einde had been tortured by the thieves. At this point in the investigation, the Belgian authorities were not yet convinced that all the crimes were connected. After all, the gang had stolen cars, coffee, food, wine, and other random items so far. With the murder of Van den Einde, Belgian police officers initially suspected a political assassination because of the caretaker's well-known support for General Francisco Franco, the former strongman of Spain. One of the first breaks in the case of the Brabant killers occurred in 2014. Michael Liebert was taken in for questioning in relation to the Brabant killers case by the Belgian police. Liebert had once been the second-in-command of the Westland New Post, WNP, a right-wing terrorist network formed in Belgium in 1981. The WNP had close connections with the Front de la Jeunesse, a francophone private militia that was found responsible for the murder of an ethnic Algerian man in 1980. The WNP was specifically tasked with attacking immigrant cafes and shops, as well as Arab immigrants themselves. Years later, during the 1990s, certain former members of the WNP and other Belgian right-wing organizations told BBC interviewers that they were encouraged to carry out random attacks by NATO. These attacks, including the work of the Brabant killers, were all part of Operation Gladio, a supposedly Italian-centric stay-behind operation established to fight communism in Europe. According to several sources, the Central Intelligence Agency sponsored and equipped right-wing terrorist groups in Italy, Belgium, and France to terrorize left-wing individuals and groups. Operation Gladio is often blamed as the cause of Italy's years of lead. While the truth of Operation Gladio continues to be debated, it is true that Liebert was not charged with any crime and was released by the Belgian authorities in 2014. The ferocity of the Brabant killers increased in 1983. Days before January 9, members of the gang murdered taxi driver Angelou Constantin and dumped his body in the trunk of his own taxi. When the police found Constantin's body, they discovered the butt of a cigarette. Even though the cigarette end had been tested for DNA, no positive matches have yet been found. Over a month later, 3 men wearing masks attacked a grocery store in the town of Genval. For the rest of February, the Brabant killers engaged in several armed robberies that prominently featured the theft of automobiles. Amazingly, nobody was killed during this time. This streak of no fatalities, though, came to an end on March 3rd. On that day, 3 well-armed thieves attacked a grocery store in Hale, Belgium. The store's manager was shot and killed after he opened the store's safe for the gunmen. The survivors of this particular robbery also said that the 3 robbers repeatedly fired warning shots that came close to hitting bystanders. This growing disregard for innocent life would become a major factor in the gang's subsequent crimes. On May 7, 1983, less than $22,000 was stolen from a grocery store in Houdin-Gougny, Belgium. The gang's next crime, the armed robbery of a mechanic's workshop, proved equally low-paying. On September 10th, the Brabant killers forced their way into a textile factory late at night. It belonged to the company Wittek van Landegem, which had just begun making state-of-the-art bulletproof vests for the Belgian police. In total, 7 vests were stolen, and the factory's night watchman was killed. The man's wife was seriously wounded during the robbery, while eyewitnesses were threatened with warning shots. 7 days after this robbery, the gang was busy robbing a Colruyt supermarket when a couple driving a white Mercedes pulled into the store's parking lot. Seeing this couple, the thieves took them hostage at the same time as police officers responded to the store's security alarm. In the ensuing shootout, 1 police officer was killed and another was seriously wounded. The couple was also murdered, and one group of the thieves made their getaway in the stolen white Mercedes. This car was later used as a battering ram against a police roadblock and received several bullet holes as a result. The Brabant killers ended their bloody year of 1983 by committing several robberies and murders. On October 2nd, the owner of a restaurant in Ohain was shot and killed by the gang after they led him outside during a robbery. 5 days later, in the town of Biercel, the gang attacked a Delhaize grocery store, wounded 3 customers, and killed the store's manager. The last crime of 1983 took place on December 1st in the small town of Anderloos. This time the target was a novel one, a jewelry store connected to a family's private residence. After 3 gunmen entered the store, they shot and killed the store owner's wife, Marie Zymusik. Jean Zymusik, the murdered woman's husband, shot back against the gunmen, but he was also killed. The Zymusik daughters, who were home during the robbery and murders, were unharmed and actually provided visual descriptions of the killers. Like most of the gang's robberies, this attack netted them little money or valuables. For some unknown reason, the Brabant killers took the entire year of 1984 off. When they returned to their criminal ways in 1985, they came back more bloodthirsty than ever. On September 27th, the gang attacked a supermarket in Braine-l'Alleud. They took a child hostage and killed 1 customer before entering the store. Once inside, they shot and wounded a man whom they felt was slow in getting prone on the floor. When the gunmen made their escape, they shot at a white van that was pulling into the grocery store's parking lot. This final attack killed the male driver and wounded the man's child, who was merely sitting in the back seat of the van. 3 people lost their lives at this location. Half an hour after this attack, 3 gunmen attacked a grocery store in Overijse. One of the gunmen shot and killed one of the 3 children playing close to the grocery store. When these gunmen entered the grocery store, they shot wildly at any customers they could see. They also took 1 man hostage. He was murdered after the gunmen made their getaway. Random cars were also shot at following the Overijse robbery. All told, 5 people died during this attack. These crimes horrified the Belgian public and forced Prime Minister Wilfried Martens to publicly respond. In 1985, Belgium was also dealing with a communist terrorist organization called the Fighting Communist Cells, which detonated 24 bombs that year that specifically targeted banks and NATO centers. The final crime of the Brabant killers was by far their most gruesome. On November 9, 1985, the gang invaded a supermarket in the town of Aalst. They mostly carried pump-action shotguns. Even before they entered the store, they started shooting and killing victims in the parking lot. In one instance, the killers cornered an entire family that included a 9-year-old girl and her brother. All were murdered except for David Van de Steen, the brother who is today an advocate for victims of violent crimes. Like their September robberies, the killers shot at random customers inside the supermarket. Several eyewitnesses later told the Belgian police that the killers were laughing and smiling as they executed hostages and attempted to shoot store employees. This final massacre by the gang killed 8 people. During most of the gang's crimes, they worked in groups of 3. Oddly enough, eyewitnesses managed to describe at least 3 of the gangsters. One gang member was called the Giant, and he was said to be somewhere around 193 centimeters or 6 foot 4 inches, or 198 centimeters, 6 foot 6 inches. The Giant was described as being the gang's leader, and at least one eyewitness said that he had a birthmark on his neck. The second gunman was dubbed the Killer. Like the Giant, eyewitnesses described this man as tall and thin. Reportedly, he spoke with a high-class French accent. The entire gang was francophone and had a dark complexion. He was also responsible for 22 of the gang's 28 murders. The Killer was the man seen laughing during the group's final massacre. Last was the man known as the Old Man. He was described as the gang's getaway driver. Unlike the other two, he was about 50 years old and short in stature. For years, Belgian detectives were troubled by the professionalism of the Brabant killers. Specifically, they noticed that these men knew how to handle weapons, thus convincing some that the gang included former or current soldiers. In early 2017, the brother of a dead man from the city of Ulst came forward to tell police that his brother had confessed on his deathbed in 2015 to being one of the Brabant killers. This man claimed to have been the murderer known as the Giant. Most shocking of all was the fact that he was revealed to be a former police officer. Christian Bonkowski, or the Giant, had once served in the elite Diane group before being fired in 1981. Bonkowski's brother said that Christian had been fired for an accidental discharge while on duty. His resentment over this turn of events haunted him for the rest of his life. As for the killer, Belgian police officers had long suspected that he was killed after the November 1985 massacre. This is a complicated conclusion given that a body was never recovered. In October 2017, British newspaper The Guardian quoted Belgian police officials as saying that saliva samples taken from Bonkowski in 2000 produced negative results when compared to the DNA samples that had been collected at some of the original crime scenes. Other suspects in the Brabant killers case included two former police officers, Madani Boucher and Robert Beyer, known.
Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Criminal Philip de Stark, drug addict and convicted rapist Patrick Hamers, and former prison director Jean Boltant. Boucher and Beyer were involved in the illegal trade of firearms, and both men sold weapons to extremist groups based in Belgium. Boltant and de Stark were supposedly connected to a gang of jewel thieves who committed heists that were very similar to the ones carried out by the Brabant killers. As for Hamers, he was known as one of the gangsters who abducted and ransomed former Belgian Prime Minister Paul Vanden Boyance. Up next, one of our Weirdo family members tells the true story about, are you ready for it? A haunted Wendy's restaurant. This episode of Weird Darkness is sponsored by Honey, and I have to tell you that having Honey as a sponsor has been more beneficial to me than I could possibly have imagined because I use their browser extension numerous times every week. I have saved money on all sorts of stuff that I used to pay full price for, stuff that I would need to buy anyway. If you don't already have Honey, you're missing out on free savings. It's literally free to use, it's free to download and install, and it only takes a few seconds to install it. And you'll want to install it on every browser extension that you use, so you're never without it when you're online shopping. Honey works for over 30,000 stores online, too. It ranges from tech, gaming, popular fashion brands, even food delivery, which I've not tried but I'm looking forward to. And by getting the Honey browser extension, you're not only doing yourself and your wallet a favor, but you're also doing me a favor as well, because downloading the extension at joinhoney.com/weirddarkness, you're supporting the show. Again, get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/weirddarkness. That's joinhoney.com/weirddarkness. And when you start using it, let me know what you're saving money on. joinhoney.com/weirddarkness. This story comes from Weirdo family member Ethan Hahn. In late 2016, I was laid off from my job at the plumbing company I worked for, and in early 2017, after convincing my wife that it was the best course of action, I applied for a CDLA driver trainee position at a local company that is the largest distributor to Wendy's, Arby's, and Popeyes. I went through the week-long orientation and was placed with a trainer named Ed. Ed ran a Wendy's/Arby's route to Connecticut. The truck would leave Saturday night and run till Monday morning. We'd shut down for 14 hours and start back up around 2 a.m. as the first store wouldn't let us in till then. After all, the employees had gone and all the parking lot lights were out, which already gave it a creepy vibe. The first night in question, we pulled up in the drive-thru, and as Ed went into the store to open it up and disarm the security system, I got the hand carts out of the back of the truck and opened up the freezer door on the trailer. Now, this particular store had an outdoor freezer outside the back door, which created kind of an alleyway between the store and the freezer. I was up in the freezer portion of the trailer, moving load bars, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye coming out from the alleyway. I figured it was my trainer coming out of the store because I saw the bright red shirts that were our company uniforms and didn't pay it much mind. Then I noticed he was moving toward the cooler instead of the freezer, which didn't make sense as I'd already gotten the carts out and we didn't have any paperwork for returns. I stood there waiting for him to finish whatever he was doing when I realized I never even heard the door open, so I stuck my head out and looked down the trailer to see what he was doing. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Confused, I started looking around for anything or anyone when I saw my trainer moving in the store through the drive-thru window. Seconds later, he popped out the back and walked over with his swift popping gait, which I might add matched the gait of the figure I had seen earlier. "All right, we got 23 fries, 36 altogether." He looked up at me, and I must have been wide-eyed or my mouth agape. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I could have sworn that I just saw you come out of the store and walk over to the cooler, and then when I looked, you weren't there, and then I saw you through the drive-thru window." He looked at me for a second, obviously creeped out, and then looked around and under the trailer. "Let's knock this out and get the hell out of here," he said. We knocked it out in 20 minutes. Several months later, after I had passed my CDL road test, I had been given my own routes, one of which was the same route but left on a different day, and yes, I had to deliver to the same store. At first, nothing happened, aside from being dark and creepy as the store's parking lot lights were on a timer. One night, I was delivering to the store, and I had finished with the freezer items and was just finishing up the cooler items when a skinny man of average height wearing jeans and a hoodie – I'm 6'1" and weigh 270 – approached the door to the store by the drive-thru. As he reached for the door, I called out, "Can I help you?" He stopped and seemed to notice me for the first time. "Oh, is the store closed?" "Yeah, if you want, there's a 24-hour McDonald's down the road." The man turned and walked away without a word, and I turned back toward my work. Then I realized that this may have been a masked way of asking if I was there alone. Truck drivers are seen as targets by thieves, especially ones making these late-night deliveries in dark parking lots such as this. I turned around to watch this guy and see where he went. He was gone. It had only been a second that I had my back turned. I walked to the front of the store. Nothing. I walked around the store and then checked the muffler place next door. Still nothing. I debated calling the cops, but I was almost done delivering. I finished up and got the heck out of there. The next week, as I drove past the store to pull in the main parking lot and drive around back, I saw a white utility van sitting in the drive-thru. I pulled around back and pulled up behind the van, and as I did, it pulled away slowly. This time I did call the police. 5 minutes later, 2 cruisers pulled in, and I told them why I was there and what happened, and asked if they'd stay there while I delivered, to which they agreed. I entered the store, and as I was opening up, the van pulled back into the parking lot. I came out and started setting up as the 2 officers chatted with the guys in the van. Eventually, the van pulled away, and one of the officers walked over to me to tell me what had happened. This officer looked like he bench-pressed train cars for fun. He told me that they said that they were there to clean the vent ducts and that I was supposed to let them in. It's fairly common to show up to a delivery and have a cleaning or maintenance crew there doing work, but they always have their own key. I said that was a good way for me to get fired, and the officer concurred. I told them I'd hurry up and get done. The last incident to occur at this store was one of the last times I delivered there. I went in, unlocked the back door, and disarmed the security system. I delivered and closed up the store, but I had to use the bathroom before I left. I did my business, switched off the interior lights, and went to go arm the security system. I approached the keypad and saw that it was already lit up. I looked around in the office and checked the dining area for any intruders. When I was confident no one was in the store, I went back to the still lit-up keypad. I reached for the keypad, and before I could even touch the button, the alarm system started counting down by itself. I noped right out of there. I've had alarm keypads malfunction, but only older ones, and this one was brand new. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please share it with someone you know who loves the paranormal or strange stories, true crime, monsters, or unsolved mysteries like you do. You can email me anytime with your questions or comments at darren@weirddarkness.com. Darren is D-A-R-R-E-N. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Minds, MeWe, and the show's Weirdos Facebook group on the Contact Social page at weirddarkness.com. Also on the website, if you have a true paranormal or creepy tale to tell, click on Tell Your Story or call the Dark Line toll-free at 1-877-277-5944. That's 1-877-277-5944. And if you're listening on the radio, be sure to also subscribe to the podcast where I upload episodes 7 days a week. All stories in Weird Darkness are purported to be true unless stated otherwise, and you can find source links or links to the authors in the show notes. The City Park Thing is from Haunted America Tours. Wrapped in Ivy was originally posted in Rockford Writes, edited by Heath Alberts for HauntedRockford.com. The Spectre Moose of Lobster Lake is by Kathy Weiser for LegendsOfAmerica.com. The Killers of Brabant is by Benjamin Welton for Listverse. And Haunted Wendy's is by Weirdo family member Ethan Hahn. Weird Darkness is a production of Marlar House Productions. Copyright Weird Darkness 2021. And now that we're coming out of the dark, I'll leave you with a little light. Proverbs 16 verse 9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And a final thought from Jordan Peterson. Don't compare yourself with other people. Compare yourself with who you were yesterday. I'm Darren Marlar. Thanks for joining me in the Weird Darkness.
Stories and content in Weird Darkness can be disturbing for some listeners and is intended for mature audiences only. Parental discretion is strongly advised.
Welcome, Weirdos! I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Here you'll find stories of the paranormal, supernatural, legends, lore, crime, conspiracy, mysterious, macabre, unsolved, and unexplained. If you're new here, welcome to the show. And if you're listening on the radio or on a streaming station, be sure to subscribe to the podcast too. I upload episodes 7 days a week. And if you're already a member of our Weirdo family, please take a moment and invite a friend, family member, or coworker to listen in. Recommending Weird Darkness to others helps make it possible for me to keep doing the show. And while you're listening, be sure to check out WeirdDarkness.com, where you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Minds, MeWe, and more, along with the Weird Darkness Weirdos Facebook group. Coming up in this episode, it's a special Darkives episode of Weird Darkness, where I reach back into the archives and bring out some dark and strange stories you might not have heard yet, as they are from several years ago. Now, bolt your doors, lock your windows, turn off your lights, and come with me into this Darkives episode of Weird Darkness.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise,
Clowns can get away with murder.
and Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
If you or someone you know struggles with depression or dark thoughts, I'd like to recommend the Hope in the Darkness page at WeirdDarkness.com. There, I've gathered resources to help fight depression with the 7 Cups app, connecting you with people who've also struggled with depression and are there to lift you up, even professional listeners there to listen at all hours of the day. If you're having dark thoughts of harming yourself or worse, there's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline that you can either call or chat online with anytime, 24/7. The folks at ifred.org are doing what they can with research and education on depression to give us the tools we need to fight against it in the days ahead. And if you feel a lack of hope in your life, take the 30-Day Global Hope Challenge. It's absolutely free. You can do it alone or with a friend or with a group. And after 30 days, you'll have a better understanding of how to build hope in your own life and in the life of others. You can find all of this on the Hope in the Darkness page at WeirdDarkness.com. History is filled with many mysteries of ships and the sea. But of all of the ships in history, none has a more haunting reputation than the infamous Mary Celeste, a vessel from which the entire crew inexplicably vanished and was never seen again. Discovered floundering in the waters of the North Atlantic in December 1872, the ship soon became an enigma, a much-talked-about puzzle that still intrigues historians and sailors well over a century later. Most consider it the greatest nautical mystery of all time, one that will never be solved. On the chilly afternoon of December 4, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia cut through the waters of the North Atlantic. She was on a course from New York to Gibraltar, and the weather promised smooth sailing with sunny skies and a good wind. Suddenly, a 2-masted square rigger appeared over the horizon. The ship's course was unsteady, and as the wind veered, the vessel shifted aimlessly. The strange ship was under short canvas in the brisk wind, yawing heavily while lurching along at only 2 knots. 2 of her sails were missing, and the lower foretopsail hung slackly at the corners. The captain of the Dei Gratia, David Reed Morehouse, could see no one at the helm. He ran up a signal, but there was no reply. Captain Morehouse, along with his first mate, Oliver Duveau, raised their telescopes for a look. He recognized the ship as the Mary Celeste, but could see no one on board. Morehouse was stunned. He knew the captain of this ship, Benjamin Spooner Briggs, and in fact had a passing friendship with him. The 2 men had dined together less than a month before when their ships had been loading cargo at neighboring piers in New York. The Mary Celeste had set sail for Genoa, Italy on November 5, 8 days before the Dei Gratia had left port. Duveau pointed out that there had seemed to be no distress signal. As the 2 ships approached within hailing range, Captain Morehouse broke out his speaking trumpet. "Celeste ahoy!" he called out. "Can you hear me?" There was no reply from the other ship, only the creaking and flapping of plank and canvas. Morehouse called again, but nothing stirred on the ship. The captain could see that the Mary Celeste was on a starboard tack, but the jibsail was set to port. To the experienced seaman, he knew this meant only one thing. The ship was out of control, and the crew was either incapacitated or dead. He ordered his first mate to take 2 men with him and board the ship. "Find out what's amiss," he instructed Duveau. A boat was lowered, and the first mate and the 2 crewmen cast off toward the silent ship. The dinghy was tied up to the Mary Celeste, and the 3 men climbed aboard. What they found has remained a mystery ever since. The deck was empty. No crew member came forward to meet them. They shouted, but no one answered. The wheel stood unattended, spinning idly as the waves slapped at the rudder. The only sound was the groan of wood and rope. The silence was uncanny. They searched the ship from stem to stern, but there was no one on board. The vessel was absolutely deserted. But if the crew had abandoned her, they had left everything behind. The hull, masts, and remaining sails of the Mary Celeste were all sound. The cargo, which consisted of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, was all intact, except for one barrel which had been opened. There was a 6-month supply of food and water. Sea chests and clothing lay dry and undisturbed. In the galley, a meal was being prepared and still hung over a dead fire. The bed was unmade in the captain's quarters, and the table had been set for breakfast and then abandoned. There was porridge on one of the plates and the remains of eggs on another. Next to one plate was an open bottle of cough medicine with its cork and spoon lying beside it. In the deck cabins, the skylight stood wide open and rain and seawater had soaked the bedding and clothing, forming large pools on the floor. The ship itself was seaworthy, and most things were in their proper place. It looked as though the entire crew had suddenly winked out of existence. Whatever had occurred, the searchers realized had taken place a short time before. None of the food had rotted, and none of the metal surfaces had rusted in the sea air. Everything on the ship, including money and valuables, was intact. The only things that seemed to be missing were the ship's chronometer and the lifeboat. Duveau knew that the Mary Celeste had carried a boat lashed to the main hatch, and now that spot was empty. A piece of railing parallel to it had been removed, apparently in order to launch the craft. The crew, it seemed, had managed to leave the ship in a single lifeboat, and they must have done so in a feverish hurry. Not only had they left behind their personal belongings, including their pipes and tobacco, which most sailors did not abandon unless in fear of death, but the ship had a disturbed look about it that suggested possible violence. Rope and canvas was scattered about on the deck. The ship's compass had been smashed to pieces. In one cabin, they found a cutlass that was smeared with what could have been blood. They found similar stains on the starboard deck rail, near a cut that looked as though it had been made with an axe. On each side of the bow were strips of wood that had been cut from the deck. The strips were 6 feet long, but why had they been cut was anyone's guess. The windows in the captain's cabin had been boarded up with canvas and heavy planks. Had the crew abandoned ship in fear of an attack or some other calamity? If so, how had they escaped? It was unlikely that everyone on board could have fit into the single lifeboat. There had been a crew of 7 on the ship, along with 37-year-old Captain Briggs, his 30-year-old wife, and first cousin, the former Sarah Elizabeth Cobb, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda. The Briggs' other child, 7-year-old Arthur, had been left at home with his grandmother so he could attend school. Duveau checked the ship's log and found that the last entry was dated for November 24, 10 days before. At that point, the Mary Celeste was passing north of St. Mary's Island in the Azores, which was more than 700 miles away. If she had been abandoned after the entry, then the ship had sailed itself unmanned and unsteered for more than a week and a half. Such a feat seemed impossible. Duveau believed that someone had to have been on the ship for at least several days after the final log entry. But who had it been? And where had everyone gone? Were they stricken with disease, madness, or had something far more sinister happened? Duveau returned to the Dea Gracia and made his report to Captain Morehouse. Although saddened by the disappearance of his acquaintance and his family, Morehouse saw an opportunity and money to be made. He ordered Duveau to return to the Mary Celeste with 2 crewmen and then follow the Dea Gracia to Gibraltar. He would claim the ship as salvage, which would bring him a sizable reward. Both of the ships arrived in the Gibraltar harbor 1 week later. Instead of salvage money, though, Morehouse was met with an official order from the British Admiralty's office to seize the Mary Celeste for an immediate investigation. The Mary Celeste had always been known as an unlucky ship. Originally called the Amazon, her first captain died just 48 hours after his appointment. On her maiden voyage, she collided with a fishing boat off the coast of Maine and damaged her hull. During the repairs, a fire broke out below decks. Her third captain managed to run into another ship off the Straits of Dover. Her fourth captain ran the ship aground on Cape Breton Island, and she was wrecked, nearly beyond repair. After all that, the Amazon was salvaged and repaired. She was given a new name and an experienced captain in Benjamin Briggs and was put back into service. At that point, the ship not only had a reputation for being accident-prone and therefore unlucky, it was probably considered to be even more unlucky due to the name change. Among sailors who tend to be a superstitious lot, changing a ship's name is thought to bring bad luck. The investigation in Gibraltar uncovered little more than theories as to what had become of the Mary Celeste's crew. They considered mutiny or perhaps some plot by the American crew to steal the ship's cargo or to sink the ship and collect the insurance. Finally, mutiny was thought to be the solution. The Admiralty believed that the crew had murdered the captain and his family and then had escaped in the single lifeboat. There was no explanation as to why valuables, including jewelry and an expensive Italian sword, were left behind on the ship. The American Merchant Navy was angry over the finding of mutiny. Captain Briggs was not only a fair and decent man, he was well-liked by all of the men who served with him. He also ran a dry ship. The only alcohol that was aboard the Mary Celeste was the cargo, and it was crude alcohol and impossible to drink. To do so would cause severe cramps and possibly even blindness. Finally, in March 1873, the British Admiralty admitted that they had no solution to the mystery. It was the first time in history that the court had failed to come to a definite conclusion over maritime law. The owners of the Dea Gratia were awarded 1/5 of the value of the Mary Celeste as a salvage fee, and the ship was returned to her owner. He wasted no time in selling the cursed ship. Over the next decade, no new evidence was unearthed about the abandonment of the ship. No one from the crew was ever seen again, and finally interest in the story began to fade. However, in 1882, the strange story of the Mary Celeste took an unusual turn. A seemingly unrelated event occurred in England, in the small town of Southsea. This event was the moment that a newly licensed doctor named Arthur Conan Doyle put up a nameplate on the wall outside of his office, where he hoped to specialize in ophthalmology. Doyle would then spend days and weeks waiting for patience and prosperity, only to find neither one. Instead, he would discover a love of writing and would chase away the boredom of his lackluster medical practice by penning stories. Doyle would go on to become a prolific writer of mystery and horror novels, the creator of the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes, and an outspoken proponent of the spiritualist movement. In those days, however, he was simply a penniless doctor with a strange taste for strange tales. In the fall of 1882, he would pen one of these strange stories, and it would go on to not only create a sensation, but would also earn a unique place in history. In fact, Doyle's harmless story would jumble the facts of the Mary Celeste mystery so badly that many believe that the blame for the case never being solved rests squarely on Conan Doyle's shoulders. The story, titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, appeared in the Cornhill magazine of January 1884. The tale was not only one of Doyle's best early tales, but he used a fictional setting to create a theory about what happened to the crew of the real-life Mary Celeste. To do this, he created an entirely different scenario. In the first sentence alone, he changed the location of where the ship was found, the circumstances behind her discovery, and even the name of the ship itself from Mary Celeste to Marie Celeste. The public and the popular press immediately seized upon the story. It was published anonymously and accepted as truth, with the fictional Jeffson claiming to be on board the Marie Celeste when she is taken over by a black radical leader with a hatred for whites. No one seemed to notice the obvious changes that Doyle had written into the story. It was taken very seriously and debated by people as the true story of the real Mary Celeste. The adventures of Jeffson created a storm of controversy for the British Admiralty. The chief investigator in Gibraltar, Frederick Sully Flood, in his role as Queen's Counsel, was so outraged by the story that he sent a flurry of public telegrams denouncing Jeffson's true account as an outrageous lie. He followed these rather embarrassing telegrams with an official report to the Admiralty, pinpointing each of the mistakes in the account. Needless to say, when the real details of the fictional story were learned, the press was delighted, as was Conan Doyle. The story would go on to launch his literary career. In addition, the story turned out to be a catalyst for a new wave of interest in the mystery of the Mary Celeste. In the years that followed, a number of other hoax accounts for the last days of the ship, none as successful as the first, emerged. Nothing was ever heard from any known member of the ship's crew again, and there was a steady surfacing of Mary Celeste survivors whose names, somehow, had been left off the ship's register. They popped up all over the world with stories that ranged from the impossible to the ridiculous. Charles Fort, an avid collector of newspaper accounts of odd occurrences and the author of several books on anomalous phenomena, suggested that the missing passengers and crew could have been whisked off the ship by what he called a selective force, which left the ship itself untouched. In 1926, Adam Bushy claimed that the Mary Celeste had been dematerialized en route, but when it returned to solid form, the crew did not return with it. Other weird stories emerged of strange accidents, giant squids, krakens, time warps, and abduction by aliens. Countless serious theories were also expressed as to the fate of the ship's crew. James Briggs, the brother of the ship's captain, was convinced that the solution to the mystery lay in the ship's last log entry. It stated that the wind had dropped after a night of heavy ocean squalls. If this is correct, it could have meant that the ship lost speed and drifted toward the rocks of Santa Maria Island. The ship's hull may have been breached, explaining the pools of water that Deogracia first mate Duveau found below decks. The crew may have believed that Mary Celeste was sinking and abandoned ship. Another explanation claimed that the ship was struck by a waterspout. This would explain the water below decks and the damage done to the sails. Or the crew may have panicked in the storm and abandoned ship. There is one feasible explanation for what happened that takes into account everything that was discovered by the Deogracia crew. There was no structural damage to the ship, and yet it had apparently been abandoned in great haste. For this reason, it seems that the evacuation was not carried out because of something that had already happened, but because of something they were afraid was going to happen. The only potential for danger on board the Mary Celeste was her cargo. Captain Briggs had never carried crude alcohol before and was likely unfamiliar with its chemical reactions. He had come from the cold weather of New York to the much warmer region of the Azores, and the barrels, shaken by stormy weather, may have started to leak fumes into the hold. It's possible that Briggs feared that the vapors could either poison the crew or that the barrels might explode. One of the barrels, it will be remembered, was opened, probably during an inspection. If the inspection had taken place by candlelight, the open flame could have caused the fumes to burst into flame, which may have convinced the captain that the entire ship was in danger of exploding. Terrified for the safety of his men, not to mention his wife and daughter, he may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat. In all likelihood, Briggs intended to stick close to the ship so that they could get back on if no further explosion occurred, but it would not have taken much wind to send the Mary Celeste sailing away from the lifeboat, abandoning the crew at sea. The crew almost certainly would have tried to catch up with the ship, but rough seas may have prevented them from doing so, and the crew and passengers of the Mary Celeste were lost forever. This theory was first offered by James Winchester, the ship's owner, and it has since been considered by several authors. Somehow, though, it's never been generally accepted, perhaps because pirates, sea monsters, and time warps are much more exciting than an ordinary yet fatal accident. So what became of the Mary Celeste after the court of inquiry was finished with her? Her owner sold the ship as soon as he arrived back in New York, some say at a great loss. But perhaps the most unlucky person in the deal was the man who bought her. The Mary Celeste was rumored to be jinxed from the beginning, and the events that followed the vanishing of her crew continued her run of terrible luck. The new owner loaded the ship with a cargo of lumber and sent her to Montevideo. During a storm that occurred while en route, the deck, cargo, and a good amount of the ship's rigging was lost. The voyage turned out to be a total loss. On the return trip, carrying a load of horses and mules, most of the animals died in the hold, and a few days later the new owner followed suit. From that point on, the Mary Celeste changed hands so quickly and so frequently that it became almost impossible to keep track of who owned her and when. She continued to sail up and down the American coastline, slowly falling apart. Then, in 1884, she was purchased by an old seaman from Massachusetts named Gilman C. Parker. For most of his 61 years, Parker had dabbled in almost every kind of illegal activity on the sea, except for outright piracy. He and some of his friends concocted a scheme to make some money off the notoriously unprofitable Mary Celeste. They loaded her with a cargo of junk worth less than a few $100s, but insured the cargo as being worth nearly $27,000. After that, Captain Parker took the ship on her death voyage to the Caribbean. In Haiti's Gulf of Gonave is a coral reef called Rocheleau Bank, which had proven fatal to scores of ships over the years. Parker set a course for the reef, and the brigantine was grounded on the razor-like coral. With the waves crashing around her, the ship began to settle. There was no immediate danger, and the crew had plenty of time to row the cargo ashore. When everything worthwhile had been salvaged, Parker ordered kerosene poured onto the decks, and then he lit a torch. The Mary Celeste burst into flames. By evening, she was nothing but a charred skeleton. Back in Boston, Parker and his associates filed their insurance claim. The company was suspicious and dispatched detectives to question the crew. The sailors, who were not getting a share of the money, freely talked about what they had seen. Soon after, Parker and his partners were in federal court facing a charge of barratry, an act of gross misconduct committed by a master or crew of a vessel which damages the vessel or its cargo. In those days, this was a hanging offense. The jury was unable to reach a verdict, however, and Parker and the other conspirators were set free. They never collected their claim, and the notoriety of the case killed their reputations. 8 months later, Parker died in disrepute and poverty. One of his friends was confined to an insane asylum, and another committed suicide. Even after she was destroyed, the Mary Celeste, the most famous cursed ship in history, was still bringing bad luck to anyone connected to her. There's a lot more to come in this Dark Archives episode of Weird Darkness. You know about me and my migraines. I've mentioned them often here on the show, but a few years ago I found some relief by using CBD oils. When using the CBD oils every day, I have found that my migraines aren't nearly as severe, and they occur less often. Plus, the knee and back pain I have that runs in my family is all but gone now, and I credit that to using CBD oil too. And recent studies show CBD might even help with depression, which might explain why I've started feeling better since starting to use it. It's been shown to have benefits on a wide variety of conditions, actually, and you can get the benefits of CBD oil in numerous products like bath bombs, gels, capsules, body rubs, muscle creams, face creams, candy bars, in powder form for cooking, and more. They even have products specifically to help your pets. All the products come THC-free, so you don't have to worry about any psychoactive properties like other hemp-related products. If you're a CBD user already, or if it's something you just want to try, visit WeirdDarkness.com/CBD to take a look at all the products available. That's WeirdDarkness.com/CBD. When shopping there, you're also benefiting the show. Check it out, WeirdDarkness.com/CBD.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now. Only on Peacock. Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
Hey Weirdos, are you ready for another Weirdo Watch Party? Well, our next one is Saturday, July 17th, and this time we're taking it to a whole new level of outrageous. Mistress Malicious and her Mistress Peace Theater returns with another movie truly deserving of ridicule and buffoonery, 1936's Reefer Madness, the cult classic. Now, for those who don't know, it was meant to be a cautionary tale for teens and young adults to learn how dangerous drugs can be, but the movie features a fictionalized take on the use of marijuana to such an extreme it appears like a parody. The story circles around a trio of drug dealers who lead innocent teenagers to become addicted to reefer cigarettes by holding wild parties with jazz music. That's right, I said jazz because nothing is more frightening than a party with jazz music. So join us as we watch the movie that was brave enough to make up facts for the sake of propaganda, and it became a cult classic in the process. Sure is a good thing films never stoop to propaganda now in the 21st century, huh? Anyway, join us Saturday, July 17th for the Weirdo Watch Party as we watch the film online together for free, while at the same time being entertained throughout the film by Mistress Malicious with skits and jokes, as well as her additions to the screen and sound of the film itself to make it even more fun to watch. It's Saturday, July 17th, 7 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. in Hawaii, or 3 a.m. in the UK. You can watch the original trailer for the film and watch horror hosts and retro entertainment every hour of every day on the Weirdo Watch Party page at WeirdDarkness.com. Nothing says holiday cheer like a horned demon who likes to torture little kids. December 5th, which is St. Nicholas Eve, is also known as Krampusnacht in some parts of Europe. Krampus is a sort of demon who accompanies St. Nicholas on the eve of December 6. On that night, St. Nicholas visits the homes of good children and leaves small gifts in their shoes. Those who have misbehaved in the past year, however, get punished by his helper, Krampus. He might take back the gifts that St. Nicholas left for the children and leave them a lump of coal instead. He might give them a birching with the switch he carries with him. Really bad children might even get carried off in his sack. Krampus is actually a pagan fertility god, another great example of how the Church managed to co-opt the pagan holidays, who has a long tail, fur, rattling chains, a birch branch, and a big black bag. He was worshipped by the pagans and turned into St. Nicholas's cohort when the area became Christian, subtly turning a god into the lackey of a Christian saint. On Krampus Day, children and adults traditionally go to the village square and throw snowballs at him to scare him off during a parade in his honor. Some people dress up as Krampus, and a special cookie is even baked for the day, and bread is baked in the shape of St. Nicholas or Krampus. On St. Nicholas Eve, children place their shoes on the windowsill or outside their bedroom door to be filled with fruits, nuts, and sweets. Sure makes that creepy elf on the shelf seem tame by comparison, doesn't it? This is the story of a ghost hunting trip to the old abandoned Elgin Mental Hospital Cemetery. I first heard about it online, where I read stories of the former groundskeeper hearing chilling sounds and heard it said that there may be 3 bodies in every grave. For over 100 years, the hospital operated as the Illinois State Institution for the Insane. The unwanted were sent there to die, and many horrific experiments were performed during the early years of treating mental diseases. Over 1,000 people are said to be buried in the cemetery, and it has a long-held reputation of being haunted. We initially had a hard time finding the place, and we were about to give up when suddenly we found it. Immediately we could feel the sadness, intense sadness. Some of these people were apparently buried with others, and they were mental patients. Being sensitive to the paranormal, I could feel their pain and suffering. The following night we performed our first investigation. Mind you, it is private property and I do not recommend going there after dark. When we went back for the first investigation, it was night, and the atmosphere had changed from lost and sad to pain and anger. We immediately felt watched, as if something was staring right at us, or many things were staring at us. So we stood outside the car, took some pictures, and left. We caught orbs and a face in the pictures. We returned a week later and finally went into the cemetery. We recorded an EVP in which, clear as day, my wife's name was said. Truly haunting. After about 15 minutes, we started to hear sirens. Thinking it was the police, we ran back to our car, but no cops ever showed up. When we played back the EVP, however, we realized that it was an old, ghostly ambulance sound that we had heard. When we arrived back at headquarters and had the time to review the EVP further, we also found that we had caught a demonic-sounding dog barking and its chains rattling. Based on this, we then planned another investigation, and 2 weeks later my team and I returned. We left an EVP recorder in the middle of the cemetery, and we all walked to the other side of the site where we found an old, rotten wooden hearse. As I and my fellow investigator headed back to pick up my EVP recorder, we saw a white light start to hover in the distance. We took photographs and continued to walk towards the light. It turned out to be a police officer. Luckily for us, the officer is very cool and allows us to stay an extra 10 minutes or so. The EVP again contained dog barks and also breathing sounds. That night, we also saw shadows that seemed to run back and forth across the cemetery. Funny, I felt welcome there, as if the spirits were pleased to be visited as opposed to being forgotten. I've been back many times during the day and have even taken flowers because those folks deserve to be remembered. It is undoubtedly haunted, but the worst thing that ever happened to me there was a few scratches, which I put down to a ghostly guard dog doing his job. Good dog. My apartment is a duplex that has the living room and the kitchen on the first floor, the 2 bedrooms on the second floor, and an internal staircase to go from the first to second floor. I returned from my office around 8 p.m., cooked dinner for my pop and myself, which we enjoyed. Then we watched TV and went to bed around 11:30 p.m. I sleep heavily, but that night, around midnight, I heard the doorbell and I woke up. My bedroom's door was locked, and when I checked, I saw my pop was in his room sleeping. Wondering who would visit us so late, I rushed downstairs to open the door. While running down the staircase, I banged into something, and instead of tumbling down, I was pushed backwards. Instead of falling, I landed in a sitting position on my stairs, where I saw a bright, white, smoking figure. I guess it was the thing I heard ringing the doorbell. It was there, standing in front of me for about 5 minutes, and then it vanished into thin air. The experience can't be explained in words. I still haven't understood what it was. Could I have been visited by a ghost or spirit? had trouble even putting this horrible event into words. Until now. I've lived in the same house for a long time. From time to time, we hear someone walking upstairs, even when I know that no one is awake or even home. My dog barks at nothing, and I promise you that it isn't something the dog heard outside. No, it's whoever or whatever is in my house. Actually, there is more than one entity in my home. I've created a nickname for the one that I think is a younger spirit, maybe a teen. His name is Phil, or at least that's what I call him. He'll mess with my mom as she hears bangs and walking. I always tell her to ignore it and it'll stop, which it does. But as soon as you speak of him, or my mother freaks out, or I'm on my phone listening to things like Weird Darkness, the activity just skyrockets. Mostly I think he just messes with me. Recently, I was walking up the stairs and I heard my name called. It was right in my ear as if someone whispered to me. Another time I really did get freaked out as I had to use the bathroom so bad and he was so active that I really didn't want to move. I stayed in the same spot until I couldn't hold it anymore, and then I ran to the bathroom, did my business, and ran back to bed. Phil is also a prankster, and he moves things around. I've just started a new job and had been provided with an ID badge. For the life of me, I swear I put it down, went to wash up, and when I came back, it wasn't there. I searched for it for ages and eventually gave up. Later, when I came back, I find the ID badge sitting right on the bed. It's not the first time I've been pranked, and it won't be the last. The nice spirit really doesn't bother me, but whatever else is in my house, the dark man, I call him, the darker entity, that is what scares me. It scared me so badly that I blocked the experience out. Until now. I haven't thought about the darker spirit in a long time. I had it stored away in my head, far, far away. But then I've been listening to Weird Darkness, and that has started it back up. The reason I forgot about the dark spirit is because I had blocked out an entire horrific and terrifying paranormal experience. The cold spots in this house come and go, but with this spirit, it's not just a cold spot. It is a terrible feeling that the walls are closing in on you, like hundreds of eyes are looking at you, as if you are about to be attacked. I was about 13 or 14. I'm now 25. I was living upstairs at the time. I can remember it so vividly now. It was very late. I can remember feeling a strange feeling, as if something was watching me. I look up and see a shadowed-out man, not a shadow person nor a man. It was a dark figure, but I could see his eyes and his face. The way it looked was not natural, and I've never experienced so much fear in my life. And when it noticed that I had seen him, he turned and looked at me. I was frozen in shock with my hair standing up on the back of my neck. The worst part was I felt that this spirit could really hurt me, and it wanted to. I pulled the covers over my head. It took what felt like hours for me to even gather enough energy to pull that blanket over me, and even longer to lay down. Finally, I